Okay, hello everyone. So welcome to the UNDP MBRF online forum, COVID-19, Accelerating the Steps Towards the Knowledge Society, and particularly to this fascinating panel discussion on building an equitable and inclusive shared future. My name is Carolina Pan. I'm an economist working in the intersection of academia and policymaking, both doing research and advising policymakers, mostly governments, and I specialize in economic development, international trade, and technological innovation. I will be moderating this panel, so let me introduce first our wonderful speakers. We have Dr. Sahar Nasser. She's a professor at the Department of Economics at the Business School at the American University in Cairo. She has also served as the Minister of Investment and International Cooperation of Egypt between 2015 and 17. And before that, she was a member of the Specialized Council for Economic Development under the Office of the Presidency. She was a coordinator of the Ministerial Economic Committee, and during this time, she also served as governor of Egypt to several international institutions, including the World Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and the Islamic Development Bank. Prior to her role in the cabinet, she spent 20 years at the World Bank, where she held several managerial positions, including lead economist and regional manager in the MENA region. She holds a PhD in economics from Cairo University, Egypt, and she has published widely on international economics and finance topics, as well as on women's empowerment. Next, we have Laurent Probst. He's a partner at PwC and leads the skills development, digital transformation, and innovation activities at PwC Luxembourg. He's the founder and partner of PwC Accelerator Network, the first international professional firm network to support tech SMEs in their internationalization strategy. After having developed a research center and in investment management, he specialized over the last 15 years in economic development initiatives for governments, regions, and high growth companies. Currently, he advises the EU Commission and international governments on strategies to accelerate the uptake of digital transformation. Laurent also led the work being done by the Strategic Policy Forum on Digital Entrepreneurship for the development of policy papers, as well as other projects related to innovation ecosystems. He has also created 2 coding schools to upskill in 3 months unemployed people and place them in sustainable jobs as web developers. Additionally, he has been appointed as advisor of the UNDP for the development of the Global Knowledge Index and has recently produced the Future of Knowledge report for UNDP and MBRF. And last but not least, Guillaume Lafortune. He's a senior economist at the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, SDSN. He coordinates the production of the annual Sustainable Development Report, which tracks the performance of all UN member states on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals agreed by the global community in 2015. He also leads other statistical and policy work on sustainable development. Prior to joining SDSN, Guillaume held positions at the OECD and the Ministry of Economic Development in Quebec, Canada. So I'm going to describe how the session is going to look like. I'm going to give first a brief description of the effects of COVID-19 on the world's economy, and then our panelists are going to dig deeper into what we learned and how this will help us build an equitable and inclusive shared future. We're going to leave towards the end 10 to 15 minutes for questions. So please do type them. And please make sure you specify who they are directed to. Please type them in English because I'm going to be reading them. So let me get started very briefly. So at the beginning of this year, we found ourselves facing the COVID-19 pandemic, which originated in China, but quickly spread through every corner of the globe. There are currently over 200 countries infected and over 25 million cases, cumulative, of course, and nearly 1 million deaths. And however, these counts are official, but they really understate the real contagion and death numbers. This is mostly because states have been testing selectively, because there's still scarcity, there aren't enough tests, and also because there isn't enough state capacity to do massive testing. In addition, we do not know much about the new coronavirus, but what we do know is that it's far more contagious and deadlier than the seasonal flu. So this has led to a dual crisis. First, a public health emergency, and then an economic collapse. So there was an unexpected increase in health costs, which are both unavoidable and necessary to save lives. And in addition, most countries have been applying very strict containment and mitigation measures like isolation to flatten the curve. This curve is the distribution of positive COVID cases over time. This is to avoid the collapse of the health care system. So to avoid that, we've been doing social distancing. However, while these social distancing measures have proven very effective from an epidemiological standpoint, because less human interaction naturally leads to less contagion, they have also proven to be extremely expensive for many countries. And this is because human interaction also means, less human interaction also means less economic activity. So this has sparked the famous debate of saving lives versus saving livelihoods. So in a nutshell, countries doing lockdowns face an initial supply shock because they're restricting people to go to work, they're restricting supply. This shock, the severity of this will depend on the severity of the measures, of course, on the isolation measures. This shock is going to be amplified through further supply shocks in the value chain, but also amplified through domestic and external demand shocks. Because if you're not producing, you're not working. And if you're not working, chances are that you're not making an income, or your income has been dramatically reduced, so your consumption is going to drop. And in fact, we've seen aggregate demand go down. Now, the overall damage to the economy is going to depend on the structure of economic activities of each country, right? So we know that tourism-driven economies have suffered the most so far, especially the smaller ones, because tourism came to a complete halt. And commodity-driven economies have also suffered because of commodity prices. Many commodity prices have hit multi-year lows. Remittances have dropped, and we're still, in most countries in the world, nowhere near the going back to our normal. However, on a more positive note, we are learning. We're still learning to adapt. We're adapting. We're having this virtual panel, which means that we are adapting. And this is about, our talk today is more about the future. What have we learned so far that will help us? So let me start asking Dr. Sahar, what would be a comprehensive, sustainable global strategy, and how would this look like for the MENA region? Dr. Sahar, if you could please unmute yourself.
Thank you for having me here with you on this panel. And I want to here highlight that indeed this is historic times. The last 2 quarters show that there has been a significant slowdown overall in so many macroeconomic indicators. And hence it is very critical to put together a strategy. And that is why I'm very grateful for you, UNDP, for bringing different stakeholders on board, from the government, from the private sector, civil society, but also academia here. So what are the lessons learned? And indeed, as you've highlighted, that now this will all depend, so that we put a comprehensive strategy that will depend very much on many variables that are still not clear yet. But it's the magnitude of the crisis and the shock, the implications of the mitigation measures that have been undertaken by many governments, but also the implication of this crisis on people's behavior in general. For example, you see some increase in the savings because the people have become more risk averse, more concerned about the future, knowing that the flow the flow of their income could be easily hit by different shocks, and hence they become vulnerable in terms of their sources of income. How much people are willing to engage in the economy once there is recovery. So there are many factors, and that will also be a function of the magnitude, the severity of the crisis, but also the duration, which is not yet very clear on how long that would remain. So what are the different roles? So you see governments bailing out people. In some other areas and countries, it's institutions. Who should the government be bailing out, by how much, and how can this take place without affecting in any adverse impact the behavior and the market mechanism overall. And then of course the people's behavior, and you've also hit on an important element is the financial inclusion, creating jobs, because unemployment has been a challenge. Indeed, several sectors have been hit. You mentioned tourism, but also airlines, but and also the remittances. Many countries have been relying a lot on expat remittances coming in. So how can we compensate that, and how can we also take stock of lessons learned on safety nets? Because now new initiatives are unemployment packages are there, relief packages are offered. So that obviously says that the safety nets have not necessarily been adequate enough. So how can we put all these different policies in a way that would be sustainable and that would also ensure that we are ready for any other implications, but also how to move on, taking into account the different behavioral patterns, whether at the market level or at people's level, to be able to mitigate, but more important, to grow in an inclusive manner. Youth unemployment is a major challenge. Financial inclusion is a main driver here, and hence you've also given examples on startups, and we need to also put a lot of emphasis there and see how can we ensure in the current system that we are able to support more young people to create their own jobs and to also start be job creators, in fact. And this all will require that we also, the different stakeholders, development partners, private sector, government, but also the community, would put a strategy that would also include an important factor that was discussed yesterday is access to knowledge and also access to markets, because there has been a lot of also spillover effect from the developed and advanced economies on developing economies, and what do we do and how do we take that forward as we move to sustainable and inclusive growth, and how to achieve the SDGs in a sustainable manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me ask you a very brief follow-up question. Do you think the region should do anything specific? So is there anything specific to the region that would not apply to other parts of the world?
Yeah, the region, one key challenge that the region has is we have a young population, and I think it is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity depending on the policies that will be adopted and the measures that the countries will be taking. So the bulge of the young population, and that takes us to how to ensure that there's sufficient job created for this young population, because that is critical for also economic and social stability. The second important element that we need to take into account is obviously the remittances. The region has been relying a lot on remittances, and definitely, as you mentioned in your opening statement, that has also been affected by the COVID-19. And then how do we become also not just relying, because there is a new platform now globally, so how can you be more, this is encouraging more localization. A lot of the young people were also in jobs that were export oriented, and countries in Europe or in the US that have also, their economies have been hit, they've been relying on exporting these products. How can we ensure that we're creating jobs in a sustainable manner for these young people? Safety nets, I think that's an important element that we reflect on. UNDP has been doing an excellent job supporting safety nets in different countries, but also women-headed households. Also, these are vulnerable groups. So how can we provide more support to women? How can we help them create their own jobs and ensure that their families have the same more important as ensure that their children have access to schools and healthcare services that is even more critical today. We're relying a lot on the internet and online as we are today. And we know that there's many regions that are lagging behind and we do not necessarily have this access to the various facilities. So how can we step in and support these lagging regions to ensure that this online and this digital education and all the various digital forms of access to information, but also markets, how can we support these countries, because they definitely do lag behind in many fronts on that.
Great, thank you very much. And Laurent, let me ask you, can this crisis help unlock opportunities for financial inclusion?
Thank you, Carolina. Do you hear me well? Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, unfortunately, my first answer is no. No countries were ready to face such a crisis. And our conclusion last year in the Future of Knowledge report published by UNDP demonstrated that all countries were totally unprepared to face such a crisis and totally unprepared for the technological, human, green, structural transformation. And they were unprepared from an infrastructure perspective, from a digital education perspective, from a health sector perspective, from a regulatory perspective, but more importantly, from a knowledge and skills perspective. And I think this crisis is clearly a sanitary crisis, but before that, this is a knowledge crisis. Nobody knows how to fix this crisis. And now it's becoming such a huge economic, social, and financial crisis and create, unfortunately, new financial exclusion. So my first answer is really about, I don't see in the current setup, with the current policies of government, I would say an opportunity to reduce financial exclusion. My second answer is, would be yes, but we need a paradigm shift from governments. And government has to really not only think about financials. This is not the case. This is a problem, but this is not the most important problem. Today, government have to create a Marshall Plan for skills to increase rapidly and efficiently the skills assets of a population. Our population is the most important asset of any country. And we need to increase their employability, their skills to facilitate their integration into the labor market. For instance, in most of the country today, do you find someone responsible for skills? Do you find a minister responsible for skills? No. No, you find a minister of education providing the education infrastructure. You find a minister of labor managing the financial compensation when you have unemployment, but no one is responsible for upskilling. I think this is one of the key learnings of this crisis. Government must appoint someone for upskilling and increase the employability of a workforce, or even young people which are not yet on the job market. Then public and private institutions, they would have to team up to create a kind of a skills for jobs pact as a national societal pact to accelerate the integration of young people on the market or to reintegrate unemployed people. And in this pact, I would say clearly the upskilling of officials, the upskilling of teachers would be a core priority, a very important priority. And we are talking about large scale. So my conviction is that we can increase financial inclusion, but we need a high, strong investment, immediate, like, for instance, Singapore is doing, for instance, currently at the moment, for the working populations and for their employability. For me, it's clear. No skills in the near future, no skills, no jobs, no inclusion. And skills is clearly, you were talking about safety net. Skills is certainly one of the most important components of a safety net.
Thank you very much. And let me ask you very quickly, what do you think is the role of the educational system, given that you're talking about sort of retraining the people to reinsert them in the jobs, right? But it seems like education is always lagging behind the skills that the people need to have to be employed in the market. So how do you see that?
Yeah, we need a revolution in the education system. Because most of the people, certainly in most of the countries, will not go to, will not attend the public education courses in the near future. So what we need is to clearly revamp this education model based on which are the core skills that a population must have in this new upcoming time, in this new century. And then from that, completely redesign the curriculum, redesign also the training of the teachers, okay? Redesign also the way to deliver the training in a digital way or in terms of infrastructure. We cannot cope now with the new challenges with an education system which has been designed 100 years ago. This is not possible. This is totally unrealistic.
Thank you very much. And let me now move to Guillaume. So what lessons have we learned regarding the Sustainable Development Goals?
Yeah, thank you very much, Carolina. So I think when it comes to the Sustainable Development Goals, I think there's three main points I'd like to emphasize here, and I have put together a few slides, so I'm going to share my screen in a second. But the first one is that we know from the previous goals that having these kind of long-term direction can help make major positive changes, and that COVID-19 should not dismantle all the efforts and the positive momentum that was happening before the crisis. So there's a real risk that we will go backwards and that COVID-19 will be a setback, is already a setback, but will be even more of a setback for the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is not what should happen. So we should keep this long-term direction in mind. The second point I'd like to emphasize around the SDGs is that they do provide a very useful roadmap for informing the recovery, right? So they do cover the right set of challenges for our time. We know the recovery will be investment-led. If we take the GDP formula, we know that aggregate demand will remain low moving forward because of the uncertainty. We know that private investment, business investment will remain highly disrupted, and trade will also remain disrupted. So there's a real role for public investment, obviously supported by private actors and public-private partnerships. But there's a real role for governments to, first of all, address the health emergency. And I often say right now that health policy is probably the most useful macroeconomic policy at the moment if we want to get back on track and address the issues related to economic growth, but also unemployment. But also to drive and to invest into certain key transformations, including towards decarbonization, but also, and I completely agree with what was said by the previous panelist on the digital transformation and skills. So that's the second point. The SDGs can be a roadmap for the recovery. And the last point, I think, because we're here with a knowledge platform, and ourselves in SDSN, we are a network of scientists and experts working around the world around the issue of sustainable development, is just to emphasize the role of experts and scientists at the moment to combat some of the rumors and some of the fake news that happens around the data and the narratives around the COVID-19, right? I mean, we might get a vaccine, but we see some sort of organized misinformation around the issue of the vaccine. I just saw another statistics recently, which there's a paper that came out saying that 800 people died from drinking highly concentrated alcohol in the hope of disinfecting their bodies. So this misinformation is really creating or emphasizing, let's say, the situation is really having a negative impact. And we are working in SDSN as part of a new Lancet commission, which was launched on July. We're working with scientists around the world to try to bring a little bit more of evidence and just share some of the lessons learned and the good practices that we see, and also to bring some truth and some evidence around the facts, and just to combat some of this misinformation. So just to support maybe what I just said, and very quickly, I'm just going to share my my screen, just to show some of the results that we have as part of our annual report, which we do, where we track the performance of countries on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which were adopted in 2015 by all UN member states. And what we see here, and I hope you can see my slides right now, what we see here is just a chart which shows basically since the adoption of these goals, what kind of progress do we see, and we calculate an index on the Sustainable Development Goals. How did major regions progress on the SDGs? And I think here the key finding is that all regions, even though we were not on track before COVID, all regions made some progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. So you see here the Middle East and North Africa has made progress on our SDG index. And if we take a longer time span, so if we start from 2010, and so that was, at the time, that was the MDGs, we also see that overall the world, which you have as a dotted line in the chart on the left, was making progress towards the SDGs. In our assessment, we see that East and South Asia was the region of the world which was progressing fastest, but overall we see progress. Now, it doesn't, not for all the goals, right? There's a difference across the goals, and we see that goals like biodiversity of climate are progressing slower. By contrast, goals related to education or on poverty were progressing a little bit faster. But that's really my message here, is that there was a positive momentum. COVID-19 should not destroy all these efforts that were happening around the world to move in the direction of a more inclusive and sustainable world. And I'm saying this because we have seen, after the high-level political forum in July, a call from certain communities to scale back the ambitions, right? To rethink the Sustainable Development Goals and maybe to prioritize certain aspects, and just a general call of scaling back. And here I just think is the role of, knowledge networks, scientists, experts, to say it's not the time to scale back ambitions. Technically and financially, we have done many studies that show that the SDGs are achievable. The problem is political leadership, right? So are the SDGs likely to be achieved? Well, under current policies, it's clearly not sure. But the problem is not technical or financial. We have costed the SDGs, it's 2% of global GDP. And so I think this is an important message to share. In our report this year, we've also framed an investment-led recovery around 6 major transformations. I won't go into the details, but these are based on a detailed analysis of the synergies and the trade-offs across those 17 goals and 169 targets. And then finally, just to say a quick words about the work that we're doing with the Lancet and this COVID-19 Commission, which has 4 main priorities and is chaired by our president, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, which is to recommend best practices to suppress the epidemic, address the humanitarian crisis and the need for global partnership and solidarity, which is, again, a problem these days, address the financial and economic crisis resulting from the pandemic, and rebuild a more inclusive, fair, and sustainable world. And so we're going to release a first statement at the opening of the UN General Assembly at mid-September. I think I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you. So let me start with one of the questions in the Q&A, I guess for you. I think you've covered it, but maybe you want to repeat this. So it says, don't you think that we have to rethink sustainable goals and maybe admit the failure of some organizations in this field to cope with the problem?
So I'm just trying to stop sharing. Am I still sharing my screen? Anyways.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I forgot. Oh yeah, stop sharing. Okay. Okay, I should be fine now. So my short answer is no, because I think the SDGs are technically achievable, affordable, but also because they cover the right set of issues. I mean, there was one criticism that came out from high-level political forum this year saying the SDGs never covered the issue of global health security, and they did not help us to prevent these kinds of crises. Well, the reality is that if we had implemented SDG 3.D, so it's very precise, but this SDG is calling all countries to strengthen their degree of their level of preparedness to face global health security issues, then maybe we would have been in a better situation. So I agree with what was said previously, that essentially no country was really prepared to face this type of pandemic, of global health security issue. And I think one of the problems is that the measures that we have before COVID-19 were actually of countries' preparedness to face a potential pandemic, were very poor predictors of the countries that actually reacted better. So we have done some analysis around this, but these global indices of preparedness were putting countries like the US, the UK at the very top of preparedness. What we see in reality is that it's probably some of the countries in East Asia, in the Asia Pacific, that reacted better and that largely managed to suppress the epidemic. So there's some lessons that need to be learned, and there's also improvements that need to happen on how to measure this specific SDG 3.D. But the bottom line, and my short answer would be, the SDGs cover the right set of issues. Not the time to lower ambition. On the contrary, and it might provide an opportunity to accelerate certain transformations, decarbonization, but also issues related to the digital revolution.
Great, thank you so much. Dr. Sahar, there's a question for you. It says, what do you think of the Egyptian experience to confront the effects of Corona economically? What are your tips for recovering investment in the coming period, especially with widespread news about the existence of a second wave of the virus and the economic effects that it will follow?
Thank you very much, Karina. I think that's a very important question. After reflecting on the SDGs and how the SDGs been helpful in ensuring the readiness of countries, and I think that is an important point that I want to highlight. In fact, SDGs in Egypt have helped. Egypt was an early bird. Egypt went for an early review for the SDGs, and hence monitoring the SDGs and the impact on women, gender mainstreaming, on youth empowerment, on access to markets, and on all of these different SDGs help the readiness. Even the digital transformation, for example, in the education system, where UNDP also played a pivotal role in these reforms, have ensured readiness, because Egypt has started digital education even before the COVID-19 hit the world. So the readiness is important. I think that matters. The social safety nets were in place that ensured also readiness. Obviously, it required additional support from the government, and that's why we see the unemployment packages, the relief packages. However, it is very important to also highlight that Egypt did move successfully also with the support of development partners, whether it's the UN or the World Bank, on developing the conditional cash transfer. That also one conditionality to that was ensuring that children have and kids have the required healthcare services to ensure that women would get these safety nets in place. So the financial inclusion is another important area where Egypt has done very well, that ensured readiness, because Egypt moved with also a lot of digital transformation in the financial system, whether it's the banking sector or the non-bank financial institution. That also helped mitigate a lot of these risks, and also ensured that the small SMEs would maintain their access to the financing even in challenging times. The startups was one of the very important initiatives that also helped a lot mitigate the economic implications of the crisis, and hence that also ensured that the unemployment is mild, and hence young people were also able to start their own business with with the Egypt Venture and different initiatives that really supported the young people having their own job, being economically empowered, but also creating jobs for others. And that's very important, but it is also critical that we take stock of lessons learned. What do we do better? One of the panelists mentioned an important thing is the role of the government, the fiscal stimulus, and the need for public investment. And that is also one key initiative that would also ensure job creation, at least in the short and medium term. And that's an important measure that we also need to reflect on.
Thank you. Thank you for the detailed answer. And Laurent, let me direct this question to you since it's on education. How can the education system revolutionize the medical industry in providing accurate research data that can be a vital solution in bridging the gap between knowledge industries?
Oh, it's a very challenging question. I think that one of the perspectives of response could be through a multidisciplinary education program linked to medical research. During my professional career, I was inspired by people like Lee Wood, who invented Amgen, who created Amgen, or created also the technologies to really scan our DNA. And in fact, he used to be a general practitioner, but when he entered into research, he said, I will not make a lot of progress as a doctor, but I need to be, as a team, to reintegrate mechanical engineering. I need to integrate IT. I need to integrate material skills in order really to create a new momentum for medical research. And now what we need to have is, specific skills on data. So I think that the future is in multidisciplinary curriculum where researchers will be confronted with different domains, and then they will be able to understand the value of each domain, because tomorrow, or even today, this is not just a one single discipline research. This is so complex that we have to tackle many disciplines. So I think the future is in that area for education.
Thank you very much. Guillaume, we have a question about, are there any concerns about balancing between economic development and safe life?
Well, yeah, I think that's that's a great question, and I think that's what we saw. That's what we saw during COVID-19. Now, I think we should look at the good examples at those countries that managed to actually limit or address, in the first place, the health emergency, while also mitigating the impact on the economy. And here, I think one good example, and we have done in our report this year, in our annual report, we've done a small mathematical exercise, a small model, to assess which countries have done the best, both on the health and the economic side. So I encourage everyone to go and take a look at the Sustainable Development Report. But our assessment just for OECD countries, which were pretty much affected at the same time and for which we had enough data, shows that a country like South Korea is probably a good example of a country that managed to act quickly on the health side. So primarily through the testing, tracing, and isolating patients. And we're also able to test rapidly a significant share of their population. And at the same time, mitigated also the impact on the economy, because they didn't have such long lockdowns as those that we have seen in, for instance, in the country where I am right now, which is France. So we do have examples of countries that managed to, let's say, largely suppress the pandemic, but also limiting the impact on the economy. And when we look actually at both the IMF and the OECD economic forecast, we see that South Korea is a total outlier, in the sense that the drop in GDP is much lower for South Korea than it is for any other OECD country. So I think there's really lessons that can be learned from a country like South Korea, but also possibly from other country in the Asia Pacific, where the numbers are very low without having gone through a very long and prolonged lockdowns.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, my next question here is for Dr. Sahar. How do you think young youth is encouraged by governments in the region to fund small businesses and enable them to gain business knowledge?
Yeah, here we need to look at that in like 3 different fronts. So first is ensuring that the environment is enabling, the business environment is enabling, and here I think the linking that with the public investment that we refer to is very important, and also to ensure that the environment is conducive, is enabling, you cut red tape, you remove the bureaucracy, and that is already taking place in a lot of legislative and legal reforms that has improved the business environment and improved the ranking of Egypt and other countries in doing business. The second front is financial inclusion. I think now with the digital transformation, that becomes even more critical, how to ensure that they have access to finance, because a lot of the packages sometimes are more directed to sectors that are more contributors, let's say, to the GDP, such as tourism and airlines. But then how can you support the young entrepreneurs to have their access to finance in a sustainable manner? So here the startups support is very important, but also some of the startups also will be affected by the spillover from the global economy, what's happening in terms of global investment, but also global trade. And hence there is a lot of opportunities for the startups today, because the digital and the ICT sectors in general is one of the tech sectors that have been picking up. So I see that there is a lot of opportunities for the startups, and I think they have a lot of a comparative advantage to play a more important role in the new world that we'll be living on and the new platform that will be there due to the COVID-19.
Thank you. Laurent, so to what extent is the level of bailout committed to public and private sector operatives, and how sustainable its impact on the economy of the GCC countries as a whole?
Yeah, again, this is, I would say, a very challenging question to assess now what will be, I would say, the impact on the economies. As Guillaume said, there are some countries which are reacting quite well, and there are some countries we will suffer during still a long period of time. What we have seen also with the 2008 crisis was that, I would say, some countries just recovered a few years ago, 2-3 years ago from the crisis. So the recovery time could be very long. And today we are facing a crisis which is much tougher than the 2008 crisis. So I think that if countries remain in the same mindset, meaning using the same kind of policies, the same kind of, I would say, the speed of action, the scale of action as it used to be, countries will not recover before 10 years. And I can tell you that there will be a lot of social issues, a lot of health issues, education issues, and economic issues. It will take 10 years for countries who are still using the same policy level, the same I would say speed, and so on. For countries like, for instance, mention South Korea, or we can mention Netherlands or others, who are reacting much more precisely, which are really taking new proactive initiatives with clearly investing into people care, or investing into really putting some very strong investments and changing the scale and changing the speed of policies, then they will recover faster. We see in GCC countries today, okay, which is very interesting, a big set of new investment, major investments in skills, in deployment, in SMEs, how to help SMEs to better build their capacities to export. I think these are good signals, but these are now to be executed properly. And this was always, I would say, a big problem. It's not just the speech of a minister which could help. This is about how this will be translated, adopted by the people on the ground in the companies. And this is the main challenge today for, I would say, for the economy, knowing that these people perhaps are not going to a company for working. They are working remotely for part of them. So I think my point is, for a faster recovery, we need a paradigm shift in government policies, particularly in education, labor, and economy.
Yes, completely agree. And Guillaume, what are the steps we should take to create positive environment again to see cash flow in the market during pandemic?
Yeah, so I think here, I think it's, as I said before, I think if we take the formula for GDP, aggregate demand will remain low. I think this is a given. Dr. Nassar mentioned the amounts of saving, and I think here just the general uncertainty will require some government intervention for aggregate demand. If we take business investment, and it's absolutely key for private investment to restart. I mean, overall, in a normal time, private investment is 4 or 5 times the level of public investment. So we do need private investment to pick up. But again, the uncertainty is just let's say, reducing private investment. Trade will be disrupted. I mean, global supply chains are disrupted. It will remain like this. So everything that's left is public investment. And here, I think public investment can have really a multiplying effect on both aggregate demand, so households' consumption, but also on private sector investment, right? So investments that are made by the public for a major infrastructure program. In Europe, it could be a new industrial policy, for instance, can help increase confidence. And obviously here I'm speaking about the economic measures, but another big priority, and that's why I said that public health measures are probably the most important macroeconomic tool, is to suppress the disease. I think the bottom line is that if we're not able to suppress the disease, we will continue to having very negative impacts and low cash flow and investment from the private sector and households. So again, 2 priorities for me for governments. One is those recovery programs, major investments, which can spur positive impacts on cash flows from the private sector, but also all the measures that are done on the health side, the social distancing, testing massively, and just addressing this health crisis. And maybe a last point on this is that here I'm speaking for countries that can mobilize additional financing through international markets. There's a whole range of countries that cannot do it, right? And I think in these moments, it's important, if we want to avoid a major humanitarian crisis in parts of the world, that we do increase the effort to support financially those countries, but also to delay and cancel possibly some parts of the debt, which are really weighing heavily on those countries.
Thank you. Dr. Sahar, what do you think is a priority to the Middle East right now? Political or economic development?
I want to just make a comment here on the importance of public investment, because it's true, as the panelists have highlighted. I want to just flag here that it is critical, because you need the fiscal stimulus, and a lot of the fiscal stimulus has gone either to bail out to social safety nets, or to bail out certain sectors that you were worried about unemployment spillovers from there. But then the investing in the infrastructure is important, because then it will ensure the readiness of the countries to bring the private sector investment in once the infrastructure in place, the highways, the ports, the different, like the power stations, all these that are critical infrastructure projects that are a prerequisite for the private sector to come in, but in addition, of course, to an enabling environment. So here, economic development, going back to your question, Carolina, is very critical, because you're talking about skills, you're talking about online, digital education, digital trade. I mean, there is a huge digital transformation, and hence education and building the skills is critical here, because otherwise we won't have access to markets, we won't have access to finance, and that will become even more challenging. So hence, I always see economic development as a prerequisite for political development. And I think we need both to work simultaneously, because also we're going through periods of election, and it's important that we ensure also the active participation of all citizens, and that they will feel that they're also contributing to the policy reform, but also to the selection of the fiscal stimulus that countries are currently undertaking. And hence that will ensure also inclusion. And I want to also highlight the role of development partners, since this event is hosted, and I know that UNDP will have a lot of initiatives and have been supporting all the countries in MENA region, but also development partners. I think UNDP can play a pivotal role through the SDG agenda on addressing the very last goal in the SDGs, is how can we bring development partners together. There is an issue of debt, so how can we do debt rescheduling, removal of debt, but also how to ensure that the financial packages, because now it's competing, right? Do we go healthcare services, which is critical, do we go education, do we help the economy recover? And that is why your role becomes even more important on how to relieve the countries from debt, but also how to ensure that there is sufficient financial instrument to support, achieve the development goals, and obviously mitigate the different measures, risks, and shocks from the global pandemic.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I think we're gonna do the last 3 questions. So let me go with Laurent. Are there plans to scale up using artificial intelligence for education? Which area of education do you expect to start with?
So, yeah, introducing artificial intelligence into university curriculum is really, I would say, it's a key priority and a key challenge at the same time. Knowing that there is a lot of awareness to be provided and a lot of, I would say, basic skills to be provided to a lot of people, including teachers. So, having said that, AI will be cross-domain. So more or less, if you take the health, if you take medical education, if you take technology or engineering, if you take automotive, ICT or economic, you will have to take into account, I would say, AI. And it's not just about the technological dimension of AI. It's more, I would say, the societal dimension about AI, how to, which are the ethical, which are really the compliance components for using AI, I would say, in different domains, which will be different domain from domain. But there are some new principles, new ethical rules. How to develop AI will be also a core element. So it's about providing the students, I would say, the core, the toolbox for using AI in a proper way and a safe way to protect human.
Thank you. And Guillaume, I have another question on education. Is it possible to consider the Corona stage as a frustration for education, and will it leave negative effects on education that last for a long time?
So that's difficult to say, and I don't have any. I mean, there might be estimates that have been produced just to forecast the impact on education, but I don't have them in mind. So I don't have numbers, but I think just from thinking about this, I think the real. I mean, there's a number of issues here, but I think one of the real big issues, first of all, is for those countries that do not have the digital technologies that we have us in the developing world. So that's just one basic point, but it's just to say that some countries simply do not have yet the access to the digital technologies. And I think the COVID-19 and the response to COVID-19 should just lead to an acceleration of the rollout and increased access to digital technologies and the internet for all around the world. So that's one point. But then the other issue in even in developed countries is the issues related to the exclusion of certain parts of the student, either those that don't necessarily have in our country access to digital technologies, or that just don't have the support at home. And that might lead to an increase of inequalities and dropouts also possibly moving forward. So that will be very important to respond to that. And I think personally that the return of kids to schools right now is one of the toughest political decision that is that is in front of us, because on one hand we know there will be more contamination happening at school. I mean, this is inevitable, but at the same time we do need to ensure that kids do go back to school. And maybe related to this, and just to emphasize some of the points that Laurent was making, for us in the SDSN and in the work that we're doing, the real key challenge right now on the economic side is the issue of job and skills. How are we going to deal with all those shadow jobs, those jobs that have been supported for a while through government policies, but that are now pretty much obsolete in various sectors, whether it's tourism, retail, transport? How are we going to ensure a fair and an effective transition to other types of jobs? And I think that's why, the intervention of Laurent was very important. And I think this is really one of the key economic questions right now, is this question of skill development and the transition. Because if we fail to address these issues, we might be facing, on top of a health and economic crisis, a major social crisis moving forward.
Yes, totally. And with kids not going to school, this is clearly not helping in the quest to improve our skill set. Definitely. Laurent, let me go back to your AI, because there's a question: when do you think AI in education will reach Arab countries?
I think it's a matter. Come back to my initial point. It's a matter of preparation of the country. When we looked with the Future of Knowledge report published by UNDP and MBRF last year, we looked at the level of preparation of countries in terms of AI. We clearly saw that most of the countries were not ready. So we did not have infrastructure, we did not have the people, we did not have, I would say, the curriculum ready for that. So there is a level of preparation to be, I would say, provided as an enabling environment by the government. And it was not done, not yet done. And so I think education will only be able to take that on board in a large scale once the basic foundation will be implemented at a country level. This is about the regulatory environment, this is about the education policy, this is about the digital infrastructures to make it to make it happen. And here again, it's about now a strong public investment. Some countries will have at the same time to catch up with the I would say the gaps that we are not able to fix before the crisis, and then now we have also to fix the crisis at the same time. So we need a kind of a double investment to catch up with these two big issues, and so for me, we need the momentum. We need a clear momentum of governments to change the way they do. We cannot just cope with the current situation. It's not possible. Just financing people who are out of job, just financing, I would say, education in the same way will not solve the current magnitude of a problem.
Thank you. And our last question for Dr. Sahar, it's a hard one. How to best use funds to confront the corona pandemic?
Yeah, prioritization is critical, because you can see that there has been some deficits everywhere. So here the prioritization really matters. And I think digital is critical, because then it takes us to education, trade, even investment, attracting more FDI. So prioritization for financing, that's number one. Number two is also making sure that we're able to mobilize more funding and not rely on debt financing. That's also an important element that we want to highlight. And here, development partners, whether from international financial institutions, UN family, or bilaterally, is important, and hence partnership is critical. But also how to bring the private sector in more, because you don't want that the government would carry the whole burden of the unemployment packages, creating, as Luana mentioned, also moving with the stimulus, employment packages, and relief. So I think here we need the private sector to step in and create more jobs. And how can we do that? By improving the environment even more, but also looking at the new platform. So that's critical, and bringing everybody together, the private sector, the government, also civil society and development partners, and also distribution of roles and responsibilities, and moving in one comprehensive strategy that would definitely ensure inclusive and sustainable growth, but within the context of the new platform in the new world that we currently live in.
Great, thank you. That was perfect to close this. Thank you. So I want to thank our wonderful speakers. Thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge. This was very, very fruitful. Thank you, UNDP and MBRF, for hosting this. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of the panels.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your contribution.
Thank you.